I would like to ask each of you to introduce yourself, tell us your name, your latest book, what you've been doing the last 20 years, just so we can get started, and then I'll go to questions. So maybe so we have an order to this, why don't we go, we'll go with Dr. Harris, then Dr. Lustig, then Dr. Yoho, and Dr. Abramson, just so in order. Dr. Harris, Dr. Lustig, Dr. Yoho, Dr. Abramson. I also want to just say for the record, each one of these doctors has their own opinion. Just because they are appearing on this panel does not mean that they agree with each other. They very well might, and they might say they do, but each doctor is speaking for themselves. They've had their own experiences, and even if they agree, one might feel stronger or less strong. So don't make the assumption that any of them are speaking for the other three. They are just speaking for themselves. Okay, so do you want to start us off, Dr. Harris?
Sure, yeah, just in 1 minute or less. So I'm a professor of orthopedic surgery based in Australia, and I co-wrote this book, Hypocrisy, How Doctors Are Betraying Their Oath, with Professor Rochelle Bookbinder, who's a professor of rheumatology and epidemiology. We're both academics, we're both clinicians, we see patients. Professor Bookbinder's in one of the top 1% of cited academics worldwide. We found, though, that in our practice, we don't like what we've been seeing. And so what we see is over-treatment, harmful treatment, and unnecessary care. And what surprised us is that this is sort of largely unknown, not only in the public, but amongst other doctors, our colleagues. So we wrote this book to bring attention to the fact that medical care, healthcare, and doctors in particular aren't really doing the best job they could. And we chose the Hippocratic Oath to highlight this. And when we looked at the Hippocratic Oath and read it, we thought, wow, this is a prescription of what we're not doing now and what we should be doing. And so we used each pledge of the Hippocratic Oath to create each of the 10 chapters of the book, and it kind of fitted very well.
Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Rob Lustig. I am a pediatric neuroendocrinologist. I'm clinically retired as of 5 years ago, but I still engage in research, policy, advocacy. I'm now also the chief medical officer of 4 startups and a paid advisor to 4 other startups. However, I do not take any money, and I've never taken any money from the food industry. I entered this through the back door. I was a pediatric endocrinologist. I went into pediatric endocrinology to take care of short kids, and then the short kids got fat on me. I treated them via the party line. You know, you eat too much, you exercise too little. And of course, none of my patients ever got better. And I started doing research in the field to try to figure out why kids with brain tumors became massively obese after their treatment. And I started realizing that the problem was not calories, the problem was insulin. And I started then looking at kids without brain tumors and said, you know, problem's still insulin. And then I started looking at adults and the problem's still insulin. And the question was, you know, what's wrong with people's insulin, and why do people need to produce 2 to 4 times the amount of insulin today than they did 50 years ago? And that led me to sugar. And that then led me to public health and to addiction and to metabolic syndrome and basically to advocacy. I have come to realize that doctors are not taught anything about nutrition. I learned nutrition in college. I majored in nutritional biochemistry in college. And then when I went to medical school, they basically told me to forget all that because that's not how you practice medicine. And I came to realize that we got it wrong, that food can be medicine, but food can also be poison. And that pharma, you know, for probably good intentions, only treats the symptoms of disease, not the actual disease itself. And so with these revelations, I said, there's a book here, and I've written a couple: Fat Chance, which was about diet and physical health; Hacking of the American Mind, which is about diet and behavioral health; and this one behind me called Metabolical, which basically takes to task the big food, big pharma, and big government in terms of fomenting our current healthcare crisis today.
Thank you. Dr. Yoho.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. So I'm 68 years old. I'm retired from medical practice, and I was actually a community cosmetic surgeon doing breast implants and liposuction and facelifts and that sort of thing. And my patients aged with me, and as we both got older, I realized they were being tortured by menopausal symptoms. And they were primarily women, 95% plus women. And I learned about how to administer bioidentical hormones, ultimately wrote a book called Hormone Secrets. And I talked about the problems with our current view of these things. We've had 60, 70, 80, 120 years experience with the various hormones. We've had 120 years clinical experience with thyroid. These things are the best drugs we've ever had. And they were being run down by an FDA that I didn't understand was completely corrupt at the start. So I got into that first and understood all the problems and the reasons why these hormones are being run down, because they were such effective drugs. They would certainly substitute for many statins and other things if they were cost effective and they were off patent, which they are off patent. So they have a hard time making a lot of money on them. So they run them all down with these black box warnings, which are fraudulent. And I step by step learned more and more about healthcare corruption. And I learned about insurance companies, I learned about the hospitals, and I learned about, Big Pharma. And I eventually wrote a synopsis of this. And actually, one of my intellectual mentors is in the virtual room. Dr. Abramson wrote some of the first material about this. And I read his books as part of my research at the very beginning. So this thing took me 3 years. The hormone book took me a year. And this Butchered by Healthcare is a summary of the bottom line about medical corruption, and it's ubiquitous. And I don't think you can tag the doctors as being the guilty parties. They are guilty, but we're all guilty. And in America, we spend twice what we do in any other country, and we get horrible results in terms of mortality and other markers. So, I can go on and on about that, but that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Dr. Abramson.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. And thank you, Dr. Yoho, for your kind words. 20 years ago, I left my family practice. I was teaching, I was a clinical instructor at Harvard, and had a family practice in a small town about an hour north of Boston. I had done a Robert Wood Johnson Fellowship after my residency and had research skills, but decided that my real calling was to go out and practice. And I enjoyed practice, and I was proud of the practice that I did. But as we opened the practice in 1982. As we got into the late 90s, it became clear that much of what I was reading and trusting and using as a basis to guide my practice in medical journals was becoming increasingly influenced by commercial goals. And Vioxx was an arthritis drug that came out in 1999. And the New England Journal of Medicine wrote or published the key study on Vioxx, which purported to claim that it was a safer drug than naproxen because it caused fewer GI symptoms. The study, as it was written in the New England Journal, neglected to include the fact that it doubled the risk of cardiovascular events and significantly increased the risk of heart attacks. The heart attacks were omitted from the primary data. And I became aware of this because the data that were presented to an advisory committee meeting in 2001 were posted on the internet. And when I found this trove of data, it just blew my mind that the New England Journal had published this article that Vioxx was the most heavily marketed drug, that the drug reps were coming and harassing us all the time, and that my patients were demanding Vioxx, and I decided to leave practice and figure out what was going on. And in 2004, Overdosed America came out, and it did contain a lot of this Vioxx story. Vioxx was pulled a week after my book came out. It had very little to do with me. Another study showed that cardiovascular risk was doubled. And I had written about it, and it was very clear that Merck wasn't going to escape from this one. And they pulled the drug. So a week after my book came out, Vioxx was pulled, and I was the guy who wrote the last book. And suddenly I was all over TV and radio and got huge coverage. And lawyers found me and started to ask me to serve as an expert in national litigation. So I spent about 10 years, 11 years in national litigation for the plaintiffs. And in that role, got to see the actual corporate hard drives of the executives and the marketing people and the scientists and the interchange between them. And we could figure out what happened. I mean, I know what happened in a lot of cases, and in some of them I can talk about it. One of them, I was able to go to the FBI, or I was able to go to the FBI and the Department of Justice, and they subpoenaed me, and it turned into the biggest criminal fine in US history for any matter for false marketing about the arthritis drug Bextra. So I did litigation for 10 or 11 years. I learned a whole lot about what the drug company is doing wrong and how doctors can't possibly know what's going on. I learned that peer reviewers, we in the United States say that evidence-based medicine is based on peer-reviewed studies. The peer reviewers don't get to see the real data. The medical journal editors don't get to see the real data. The guidelines writers don't get to see the real data. And doctors, I think the sin that I see doctors being guilty of is that they are not curious enough to understand that they can't possibly know what the best way to treat their patients is when no one has access to the data. And as we talk, my biggest fix for all this is to make this data available in ways that doctors can access it so that they know what the true evidence shows. But as time went on with litigation, some money was changing hands. The plaintiffs won significant awards, but this knowledge problem was not getting straightened out at all. And even the biggest, most important trials were getting very little coverage in the press. And I decided that I needed to write another book and explain what's going on. It took me 6 years to write Sickening. It just came out February 8th. It's wonderful to have it done. I've had a great run on podcasts, but I'm now entering another chapter and learning now how different the mainstream media coverage is of these critical ideas about pharma. And I'm getting very little coverage, virtually no coverage from mainstream media. Pharma has learned how to keep us out of the public consciousness. So now we've got another challenge. I know what's happening, and I wrote a book about what's happening, and publishing is a pretty free enterprise. But I don't know how we're going to help American doctors to understand that they can't possibly know how best to treat their patients. And this is a core problem in our healthcare system, which is now, if our age-adjusted mortality in the United States were equal to the average of 10 other comparable countries, 480,000 fewer Americans would be dying every year. And for this healthcare, and our healthy life expectancy has gone from 38th in the world in 2000 to 68th in the world in 2019, before the pandemic. And for this awful health and healthcare, we're paying an extra $1.5 trillion a year. So we've got, it's a match for the climate crisis in terms of the challenge to the democracy and our ongoing function as a country. And we've got to figure out how to do something about this.
Thank you. Okay, so the first question is, there are, as of September 2021, there were 1,062,205 medical doctors in the United States, according to Google. So the question is, these doctors are basically the source of health information throughout the country. How much of the information that the medical doctor that we go to see is based on clinical trials? In other words, before we talk about clinical trials, I want to understand, when someone goes to the doctor and the doctor gives you advice, is clinical trials a little piece of how he advises you, or is it a large piece? Because if it's only 5% of his opinion, then it wouldn't be such a big deal if clinical trials were accurate. But if you're saying, no, it's a very significant way that he makes decisions on what you should do, then we would be much more concerned about clinical trials. So the first part is, how much do doctors base their information on clinical trials? Then the second part is, are clinical trials accurate? In other words, all of us in the public have been told our whole lives, don't worry, before anyone gives you any information, any doctor, they carefully look at clinical trials, which is this incredible system that guarantees that only the most accurate, precise, perfect information gets to you. You have nothing to worry about in terms of safety because a clinical trial has been done. So the general public feels like when we go to a doctor and he goes, I read a clinical trial in a medical journal, we feel like this has been triple checked by the smartest people in the world. So those are the questions. How much does the doctor base his opinion on clinical trials? And are clinical trials a solid, accurate piece of information that we could count on and know it's accurate? If you could,
Stephen, why don't you let me lead off, and then everyone can attack me.
Sure, you can all speak on this. You can all comment on it.
So the FDA and pharma work together to fake their drug patent studies. They use statistical manipulation. They corrupt their research subcontractors. They hide studies that don't promote their drug sales, just like they did with the HPV vaccine. And I'm gonna give a couple of quotes to lead off this discussion. Peter Goethe, who's one of the founders of Cochrane, which is one of the remaining accepted source of information in medicine, he said, the pervasive scientific misconduct has led to a research literature where one has to dig deeply to find the few gems in all the garbage. And the title of a BMJ editorial last year was "Time to Assume that Health Research is Fraudulent Until Proven Otherwise." So I assume everything is fraudulent until proven otherwise now, based on these accurate sources. And I don't think that anyone bases their actions on good research that is carefully done anymore. I mean, it's been a mess for 20 years, and it's gotten progressively worse to the point where a lot of it's total fraud. So attack that. The medical journals are prostitutes. I mean, their editors are paid hundreds of thousands of years openly by drug companies, and 95% of their articles are ghostwritten by industry. And in law or business, these sorts of, quote, conflict of interest could result in criminal prosecution. But in medicine, you just have to disclose your conflict of interest. I mean, there are payoffs.
I think I could probably give a different perspective on that. Clearly, there is some good research out there. One of the problems is that most doctors don't have the scientific skills to be able to distinguish between good trials and bad trials, and they're often not given all the information. However, a completely different angle on this is that in some areas of medicine, there just aren't any trials. So it's not like the trials are corrupted or badly reported. They just haven't been done. And that's particularly the case in surgery. We recently published an article looking at surgery for chronic pain. And we reviewed we looked through 12,000 clinical trials that had been done in the 15 most common procedures, most common operations. And so there's a lot of trials being done, but we found that less than 1% of those trials actually compared doing the surgery to not doing the surgery. So there's thousands of trials looking at tweaking this little part, or adding a screw here, or the technical aspects of a procedure. But there's very little evidence in surgery that doing it is better than not doing it. And what we found is when those studies were done, in the handful that we found, most of them showed that doing the procedure was not more effective than not doing it. And yet these are procedures that are still commonly done.
I'll go next. I remember the day I got my white coat in medical school. One of the most prestigious and prolific writers in the field was asked to speak to the class. His name was Dr. Martin Gardy, and he at Cornell Medical College, and he said, and this is a common refrain, 50% of what we teach you is wrong, we just don't know which 50%. Now, that was an offhand comment, and pretty much everyone else in the class forgot it. I remembered it and said, I'm going to have to basically keep my eyes open for the rest of my career, because if 50% of things are wrong, I've got to learn how to do it right. The problem is that a lot of doctors, as you said, Ian, don't have the skills. They go to medical school because it's, quote, trade school. And, they apply that trade for the rest of their careers and don't really learn how to do things properly or keep up and abreast with new information that comes in. And I agree with that. I do agree with that. Having said that, there is data that actually shows that 10% of what we know in medicine today is due to randomized controlled trials, RCTs. Now, when you talk about clinical trials, there are many different kinds of clinical trials. There are clinical trials that are basically 1,000 case reports. That's a clinical trial. There's also clinical trials that are not randomized. There are some that are randomized. There are some that are double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized. There's different levels of clinical trials. So saying the word clinical trials doesn't actually mean anything, because you have to talk about which kinds. And it's only been shown that randomized controlled trials actually rise to the top in terms of veracity. Having said that, there is another level of proof that does constitute proof that people basically throw in the garbage and should not. And I do not. Studies. These are natural history trials. This is how we know, for instance, tobacco causes lung cancer. Has anyone ever done a clinical trial where they've taken naive patients and started them smoking? Ain't going to happen. Illegal, immoral, get thrown in jail if you tried. So, but we still know that tobacco causes lung cancer. How about chronic traumatic encephalopathy from football trauma? We know that too, but there's been no clinical trial. So there is a level, it's called econometric analysis, which is a natural history time course analysis where time and change over time, assessing the confounders as you go, will also give you information that does constitute proof. These are the Bradford Hill criteria for causation. If you include econometric analysis, the level of what we know in medicine rises from 10% to 50%. But that still means that 50% of what we know in medicine is basically pretty much random. So bottom line, I agree with the other members of the panel. We clearly don't have enough in the way of true veracity of evidence. And we don't really understand what evidence-based medicine even means.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm up next.
Yes.
And I want to build on what Dr. Lustig has just said. There are those issues that you can study in the observational way, like lung cancer and smoking, or encephalopathy from trauma from football. But most of the information that we know about drugs has to come from randomized controlled trials. And our so-called evidence-based medicine is built on a foundation of high quality randomized controlled trials And then the hierarchy goes up to systematic reviews and then to guidelines. The problem is that when we practice evidence-based medicine, that's what good doctors are supposed to do. Evidence-based medicine has to be based on evidence. And the evidence is not available. The research tool that you need to get the real evidence is a subpoena. And there's virtually no other way to get it. So even the doctors who are dutifully reading journals and critically reading the research technique and the research design and the analyses, they are not getting near the evidence. They're like the slaves in Plato's cave, where they're looking at the shadows on the wall and thinking they're getting evidence. And we can't practice medicine without evidence. The systematic reviews can't cure that problem because they're built on the studies that have not been peer reviewed. And the guidelines are written by experts, many of whom have conflicts of interest, and many of the organizations that are coordinating the guidelines have conflicts of interest. And the experts who write the guidelines, they too don't have access to the data. In fact, this problem is so universal and kept so secret. I mean, it's just unbelievable to me that I didn't find out about this until I was well into the process of being an expert in litigation. And that we don't know that evidence-based medicine is not based on evidence, and that the United States is unique amongst wealthy nations in not having health technology assessment. So we have no outside independent organization like Dr. Harris was talking about before we came on, where non-conflicted, serious experts get together and determine what the evidence really shows. We don't have that. So we don't have, the journal articles are not based on evidence. We don't have health technology assessment to inform doctors. And that leaves the field wide open for the pharmaceutical companies to design studies and to analyze studies and to publish studies in ways that serve their financial interests. And they're very clear that that's their job, is to make as much money, to return as much money to their investors as is possible without a ceiling. It's not like they need 20% or 30%. They need as much as the executives can squeeze out every year, or the executives are going to find another job. So we have a system where the emperor has no clothes, and we can't get the message out that we need evidence to practice medicine.
Thank you. So just to make it really simple, and it's a hard question, but to make it really simple for our audience, how many pharmaceutical drugs exist in the United States today, and what % of them do you feel there is accurate information on the benefits and risks that it would be appropriate to recommend them to someone?
The German health technology assessment folks looked at this issue, and they determined that of the new molecular entities that are approved each year, so this is not the Me Too drugs, it's not the drugs that are long-acting or combined or in some way a reformulation. The 30 or so new molecular entities that the FDA approves each year, 1 out of 4 of them has been shown to be significantly superior to previously available therapy. And the problem, as I was just saying, is that we don't have health technology assessment in the United States, so the doctors can't know which one of the 4 is the one that really will improve their patient's care. And it turns into a marketing free-for-all, and it's just which companies can market most effectively that determines their sales.
I completely agree with that. The bottom line is when you're instituting a new therapy or assessing a new therapy, you don't compare it against placebo. You have to compare it against placebo and any previous therapy to be able to determine whether or not there's an improvement in efficacy. And when you do the statistics, you have to compare the new drug against the old drug as well as against the placebo. And you then have to look at number needed to treat to determine whether or not there's actually a value to, to the medical profession and to mankind in terms of using it, that enough people are actually helped by it, that it actually is worth the cost. These are things that are never discussed.
Yeah, and let me jump in and then I'll back off. If you look at the FDA approved label for Humira, which until the COVID vaccines came out was the biggest selling drug in the United States and the world. In the FDA approved label of Humira, which belongs to the manufacturer, not to the FDA, it does show one trial that compared Humira as a single drug to methotrexate as a single drug to do that study, Dr. Lustig, that you were just describing. And what it shows is that Humira, which costs about $480 a year, is equally effective to, methotrexate that costs $480 a year is equally as effective as Humira, which costs $72,000 a year.
I really liked Dr. Abramson's characterization that to do science, what you need is a subpoena these days. I mean, that's a soundbite. But what we're dancing around, we can talk about, we can split hairs about the research types and the different things you have to do to get proper science. But the thing we're dancing around is that according to their criminal settlements with US federal prosecutors, Big Pharma is the most criminal industry in history. They've lost $86 billion in judgments and settlements to civil and US federal prosecutors since 2000, and they have thousands of criminal records. So most of the studies we're talking about are not surgical studies. Everybody knows there's hardly any decent surgical sham surgery studies, as the other gentleman alluded to, with a possible exception of a few things like endoscopic knee surgery, where we do have good sham surgery studies that show it doesn't work at all. For the drugs, we have to assume that the way the study is set up and the conclusions and the way they hide the data completely adulterates the results. So Dr. Abramson is quite Mandarin about the way he phrased it, but he understands this subject and this comprehensively, and I like the soundbite.
Thank you.
Isn't there a difference between, because I think what you're referring to when you say you need a subpoena is you're referring to industry-sponsored trials.
They're all industry-sponsored.
How much research out there in the pharmaceutical industry is independent, is not industry-funded?
So 86% of clinical trials about drugs are industry-funded.
And are the 14% that are not more reliable? I mean, can we look to them?
That's a good question, but the 97% of the most frequently cited studies of drugs are commercially funded. So that is what is dominating the knowledge ether about what people think what docs think they know about the drugs.
Let me throw something in also, bringing it back to something Dr. Abrams, I think it was Dr. Abramson said earlier about meta-analyses. People use meta-analyses to try to get at this. Well, the fact is meta-analyses are conglomerations of multiple different studies to try to get to one single answer. And often those studies have different procedures and different outcome variables that they look at. And the way I look at meta-analyses is garbage in, garbage out. Let me give you an example of garbage in, garbage out. It's not related to drugs, it's related to food, but you will get the idea. A meta-analysis was published back in 2015 by my nemesis, who will remain nameless for the moment, looking at the question of sugar-sweetened beverages and weight gain and diabetes, okay, obesity and diabetes. And the result of that meta-analysis was inconclusive effects of sugared sweetened beverage consumption on obesity and diabetes. My colleague here at UCSF, Dean Schillinger, looked at that study and said, I see what's wrong here. And what he did was he redid the study, since all the papers were mentioned, in the reference section. He pulled all those papers and he redid the meta-analysis, and he added one variable: industry sponsorship. It turned out, of the 60 studies in that meta-analysis, 26 of them were funded by industry. And of those 26, all 26 said no effect of sugared beverages on diabetes or obesity. Of the 34 studies that were independently funded, 33 of them showed a significant relationship between sugared beverages and diabetes and obesity. In other words, the industry had polluted the literature very specifically so that they could then do a meta-analysis and say, see no effect, because inconclusive, because they basically dropped, peed on the medical literature. So, doing it right is essential, and having the data is essential. And yes, industry-sponsored studies are industry-sponsored because they are looking for a specific answer. They do not have the null hypothesis in mind when they do the study.
Let me clarify. Did you, Dr. Abramson, say that 97% of the most frequently cited studies are funded by industry? Is that what you said?
Yes.
And what does that mean in terms of if someone goes to the doctor, if 97% of the most frequently cited studies are funded by industry, what percentage of pharmaceutical drugs that are prescribed should I assume are more beneficial for me than not taking? In other words, forget about comparing it, even if it's an older variety, instead of comparing it to an older variety, just whether I take it or not, what percent am I taking something that's actually more detrimental than if I didn't take it?
The answer is definitely you can't know. I gave a lecture at Harvard with Jerry Avorn, who wrote one of the first wave of books that came out when my first book came out. And he said he tells his residents, when a new drug comes out, don't prescribe it for your patients for a year, until it's been out for a year. But if the patient's in your family, wait 5 years.
That's great.
Okay.
The consensus seems to be about half. That's a simple answer. Half the drugs either don't work or are actually harmful, and that's in several articles say that figure. Here's another quote that I like to say. Harry Lloyd, who was a Park Davis pharmaceutical CEO, he said, if we put horse manure in a capsule, we could sell it to 95% of these doctors. And that's their attitude towards us, the patients and the doctors.
There's no question about that. I mean, when AstraZeneca was losing its patent on Prilosec and came up with what's the proton pump inhibitor that starts with a Z? I'll think of it in a second. No.
Not
Zantac.
I'll get it.
No, Zantac is a previous generation.
You're right.
We'll get it. It doesn't matter. But AstraZeneca came up with this solution. Nexium is the drug. AstraZeneca came up with this solution that was Nexium, and Nexium is actually just one of the two halves of the organic molecule that makes Prilosec, and it's clearly no better. It's a little bit stronger because it's metabolized more slowly, but you can adjust the dose. But the point that I want to make is that AstraZeneca had a patent on Nexium, and therefore they could put as much money as they wanted into marketing that drug. And I didn't write it in the book. I think Dr. Yoho said maybe I'm reined in a little bit because I still have an academic appointment. But that's what I would have written in the book, is you could put dog shit in the capsule And as long as you have a monopoly on that so that you can invest as much money as you want to market it, you're going to be able to sell it.
By the
Okay.
way, I mean, just for the audience, in case they don't know, all those proton pump inhibitors are now associated with Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, God.
So you've said that 97% of the most frequently cited studies are funded by industry. So I guess we're very lucky then that these studies, before they reach the public, they go to the medical journals and the big 5 medical journals. And I assume that these medical journals carefully screen it and only put in the best ones, the most accurate ones, the most scientific ones to protect us. And that's why they have a good name, because I assume they carefully screen everything so that nothing reaches the public or doctors that isn't accurate. What is that? That's the version that the public believes about the big 5 medical journals and the rest of them. Could you tell us the reality of the medical journals?
The public has to know that the medical journals say they're doing peer review. They say that they're independently assessing the analyses that are submitted for publication, but they do not have access to the data. I can't say this any more clearly. They don't have access to the data. They're trusting that the drug companies are representing their data accurately and reasonably completely. And the drug companies' one job is to maximize the return on financial investment of their investors. We've got a complete disconnect. The journals are in the action. They're selling reprints. A big part of journal income has to do with selling reprints of these commercially valuable articles. So 41% of the Lancet's income in, I think 2005 was the last time they gave their data out. 41% of the Lancet's income comes from reprints. Reprints, they're in the job of selling reprints. And if that isn't the biggest conflict of interest.
To the pharmaceutical companies. The pharmaceutical companies purchase the reprints, so they're direct kickbacks to the, yeah.
Correct.
Explain that again. Explain what a reprint is a little slower.
So like in the Vioxx, which was our biggest drug disaster probably ever, the New England Journal published an article that it found out was incomplete and inaccurate within months of it having published that article. But it continued to sell reprints of that article, which claimed to show that the drug was a safe drug and a good drug. The New England Journal sold 900,000 copies of that article, mostly to Merck. So Merck could arm their drug reps with the article when they went calling on doctors to doctors' offices to say, here, look, the New England Journal says that this drug is a good drug. The New England Journal took in somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000 in reprint sales of that article when it knew that it had been hoodwinked because the peer review that didn't happen did not uncover the fact that there were cardiovascular events that hadn't been presented in the article.
Let me back up for Stephen just a second and explain to him what the heck is going on here. Stephen, it's against the rules to take a photocopier and copy those journals. You've got to pay $10 a copy or something, whatever it is, John. How much do they pay for those reprints? And so the pharmaceutical companies have another chance to pay off those journal editors, and the journals depend on this kind of revenue to fund their whatever the heck they're funding over there. And so I think these journal editors, they're the most sophisticated people in all of medicine. They see everything that goes on, and they are clearly to blame for a lot of the lies that get into medical journals. They understand the difference between absolute and relative risk in a fine-tooth way that hardly any of us do. And they allow that sort of thing to get in to fool the general practitioners and the people that don't get it, and to claim that there are conclusions that really aren't made. So anyway, it's a system of payoffs.
There's a bigger problem though with peer review, and Dr. Abramson is pointing at one problem is that they don't have all the data, and certainly with industry studies, that's a problem. But even when a study goes to a journal, it doesn't get the ideal peer review, Stephen, that you were referring to, where it goes out to independent experts who look at it objectively and pass down judgment. That's the way science is supposed to work. There are so many journals now and so many submissions They all have difficulty getting people to actually review articles. The people they get to review articles probably often don't understand it. I've seen peer reviewers of major journals write reviews to the effect of, I don't believe this study because it doesn't fit with my prior beliefs, without sort of commenting on the science of it. So peer review is a big problem. It doesn't work the way it should. The problem is, it's a bit like Winston Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst system of government except for all the others. So I don't know what you replace peer review with. It's still the ideal, but it's just not being worked properly.
So the clinical trials are funded by the industry. The medical journals are receiving money from the industry to buy the reprints of the magazine. What about the FDA? What role do they play in looking after my best interest to make sure that anything that I consume is safe and effective? What's their role?
Half of the FDA's budget is paid directly by pharma through user fees, which are incurred during the patent process. So the FDA is completely a creature of the pharmaceutical companies. When 50% of your budget is paid, you can't afford not to approve a drug because you might not be able to make your own payroll. They think of these companies as clients.
Remember also that the executive leadership of the FDA comes from pharma and then goes back to pharma. Same as the USDA, comes from the food industry, goes back to the food industry, known as agency capture, written up numerous times in many journal articles. The Economist has done a whole thing on elite capture. The bottom line is the culture at the FDA is one of, we have to make nice. They are not the big stick. And remember that the enforcement arm of the FDA and the USDA, for that matter, is the Department of Justice. And they're, kind of busy, chasing drones and, other stuff.
So I had a unique opportunity. I was at a faculty ethics seminar at Harvard in 2003, maybe. And Janet Woodcock, who has been the acting director of the FDA for the last couple of years, and who was at the time the director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which approves new drugs, was there. And I asked her as meekly as I could, why the FDA allowed the Journal of the American Medical Association to publish an article about Celebrex, which is a weaker cousin of Vioxx. Right. Why the FDA allowed that article to get published in JAMA when the FDA knew, the FDA reviewers wrote very clearly that the article in JAMA was based on only the first 6 months of the study, which claimed to show that Celebrex had an advantage of being gentler on the stomach. But it was a 12-month study. And the second 6 months neutralized the benefit, and there was no benefit for the 12 months overall. So I said, Dr. Woodcock, in all humility, why didn't the FDA step in here and tell the American people and the doctors that that article was not accurate? And I knew she knew it was not accurate because the FDA reviewers were very clear about that. And she said, it's not the FDA's job to correct the literature. We don't do that.
What is ghostwriting, and how does this come into play?
So ghostwriting is when an industry shill manipulates and massages the data and phrases the article line by line, and then the industry hires the author to affix his name for a large fee. That's the way it works. 95% of all medical journal articles are ghostwritten by industry. I mean, it's
hate to tell you, but 99% of bills introduced into Congress are ghostwritten.
Yeah, I can imagine. The thing about this is the FDA covers both the food and the drugs, obviously, and the FDA has a $5 billion budget, but the drugs, the medical industry that the FDA supervises is 4 trillion, and I don't know how big the food industry is. So they've got jobs that they can't possibly do. I mean, they're not big enough. And regulators, they tend to get co-opted like this. Regulatory capture is a real thing, and it's happened in the financial services industry. Obviously, that's the classic example that everybody knows about.
So there was a wonderful study that was published in the New England Journal that looked at the terms of the research contracts between academic medical centers and the drug companies. And it showed that 50% of those contracts gave the drug company the right to write up the study, and the academic authors of the study were given the privilege of reviewing what was written, but no authority to change it.
The only authority they have is to remove their name. And then they don't get the money.
Correct.
What does AMC stand for?
Academic Medical Center.
Oh.
So can you repeat what you just said again?
So the academic medical centers used to do 80% of the drug company's clinical research back in 1991. That changed very quickly. By 2004, they were only doing 26% of the pharmaceutical companies' research. The drug companies pulled the research out of the academic medical centers, and they gave it to the contract research organizations, private research companies who worked for their client pharmaceutical companies. So the academic medical centers had a problem. They lost a lot of their money, their research money. In order to maintain the 26% that they still had, they had to negotiate research contracts with the drug companies on the drug companies' terms, or the drug companies would pull yet more money out of the academic medical centers. So that shows that when you look at those contracts between the pharmaceutical companies and the academic medical centers, 50% of those contracts say that the drug company has the right. This started as a discussion about ghostwriting. It's ghostwriting. 50% of those contracts say that the drug companies can ghostwrite those articles, and the academic researchers don't have the authority to change them. They can suggest changes. And as Dr. Yoho said, the only authority that the academic authors have is to resign.
I agree with you, Dr. Abramson. Everything you said is true. However, there's another piece to that puzzle that has to be added to the mix, and that is the fact that back in 1990s, when as you said, 80% or so of studies were done in academic medical centers. That was in the days when we actually had clinical research centers. We had the infrastructure and the capabilities to be able to do those studies in academic medical centers. Over the course of the 1990s and 2000s, clinical research centers around the country were closed in order to save money. And ultimately, back in 2003, the CRC concept was basically turned into, quote, the CTSI, the Clinical Translational Science Institute, where basically no drug studies could be done that came from outside, only studies that individual principal investigators in that university was sponsoring themselves, A studies down to D studies. And I know because I got caught in some of that as well. So the bottom line is, it is true what you say about the pullout of pharma from those medical centers, but the medical centers had a lot to do with why that happened.
And now let me ask you a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Doesn't when we talk about translational medicine, we're talking about academics who used to not be profit driven, but driven by the idea of pushing back the boundaries of our knowledge. The purpose of translational medicine is not very far from the purpose of the drug company research. Is to translate science into money.
Indeed. This was Elias Zerhouni's thing, when he assumed the head of the NIH, before Francis Collins. And, basically, they turned it into a, profit-making venture.
Right.
let's be sure Stephen understands what a contract research group is. And so, Stephen, this might be some group in India that you've met on the internet that will supply you with results that you don't even know whether they're freaking. There may be one person in a room, in some basement with a baseball cap on his head. I mean, it's that bad. And if they supply results that are contrary to the pharmaceutical company's wishes, they never get hired again. So, I mean, I'm exaggerating for emphasis, but that's the level of, that's what our pharmaceutical trials have degenerated into. Is it 75%, John? It's contract research groups. I mean, what is it now?
74, yeah.
Oh, God. So there's no control over that by anyone outside of the,
Dr. Lustig, you have a chapter in your recent book called Because Pharma Was Their Teacher. Please explain what that was about.
Yeah. So let's explain why it's only half a clause. Chapter 3 in the book basically says doctors need to learn about nutrition. The chapter 4 basically says dietitians are insane. Chapter 5 says the dentists lost their way. And then finally, chapter 6 says because Big Pharma was their teacher. So it kind of goes in order. What you need to understand is that medical schools today are set up based on a report that was issued in 1910. Okay, it was called the Flexner Report. And Abraham Flexner, who was an educator, not a doctor, his brother was a doctor. Simon Flexner was actually the president of Rockefeller University at the time. He wrote this, and he wrote it at the behest of John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller underwrote the Flexner Report in 1910. Now, why did John D. Rockefeller, who was a Baptist who didn't believe in medicine, who actually believed in folk cures, want to fund a complete overhaul of the entire medical establishment? What was in it for him? And the answer is 2 words: coal tar. Coal tar. He, head of Standard Oil, okay, one of the byproducts of refining petroleum was a whole bunch of coal tar. Now, it had been shown that coal tar could be used as a therapeutic for various, especially skin conditions, but other conditions as well, and actually is one of the top 10 discoveries of the 19th century in terms of therapeutics, and is still used today for eczema and various other sundry disease processes. He wanted to get into the pharmaceutical industry. He wanted people to use coal tar. And he set up the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901 with that in mind. And he ended up funding Abraham Flexner to do an overhaul, basically saying, doctors need to learn how to prescribe medicines. And that's what the Flexner Report said. It was about evidence-based medicine, and it was about pharma, big pharma, because he was getting into the field. In fact, that's how medicine basically got co-opted. Nutrition didn't even exist in the Flexner Report. It wasn't even mentioned. Not one word about nutrition in the Flexner Report, which is pretty funny considering the Flexner Report came out in 1910. The first vitamin, thiamine, was discovered in 1912, 2 years later, where we realized, oh, there's this stuff called micronutrients. Vitamins actually cure diseases like beriberi and pellagra and scurvy, etc. That didn't make the Flexner Report. And so the Flexner Report basically served as the template and the blueprint for the overhaul and the closing of numerous medical schools at the time, and basically abdicated any responsibility for nutrition to Big Pharma. And to this day, The nutrition is only part of the curriculum in 28% of medical schools in the country. And the number of contact hours that doctors learn in those 28% is a median of 19.6 contact hours. When you consider that a normal medical education is about 6,000 contact hours, the fact that nutrition, which could solve 75% of chronic disease, is given a total of 19.6 contact hours is pretty laughable. And so the concept that pharma controls the medical curriculum because they underwrite the medical curriculum, they provide 80% of the operating budget of medical schools today. So they don't want to know anything about nutrition. They want to know about how to prescribe. It's about the prescription pad and the procedure.
You just said that 80% of the operating budget of med school comes from pharma. Is that what you just said?
That's what I said.
What does that mean, the operating budget? Does that mean their money to run the schools?
Money to run the schools, yes.
And in return for that, do they have complete control over the curriculum?
Well, they have a whole lot of influence and input into the curriculum. I wouldn't say they control it, but they certainly influence it.
Dr. Harris, would you comment on, sorry, one second, on endoscopic knee surgery for arthritic knee and hip pain? Is this something that there is evidence that it's effective, or do you have any information on this?
Yeah, it's a very famous and I think a cautionary tale of how we should be practicing medicine, and in particular surgery. Unfortunately, the way surgery is practiced it's like an apprenticeship. I did that apprenticeship. I ended up operating and doing the procedures that my mentors had taught me to do without really just assuming that they worked and without really critically looking at them, appraising them properly. And one of the most common procedures in the world, and particularly in orthopedic surgery, which is where I work, is a knee arthroscopy, or what people sometimes call keyhole surgery, where cameras and instruments are inserted through very small incisions into the knee. It became very popular in the 1970s and 80s. And sometimes with good reason, because the alternative was a bigger open procedures with big scars. And so it seemed like it was a good idea. And unfortunately, surgery, as I said, is largely based on what we call observational evidence. And so what we were doing and what I was doing this procedure widely in the 1980s and 1990s, is that somebody would come to you with knee pain. And often if they're over 40 or over 50 years old, they will have degenerative changes in their knee. I mean, that's just a normal finding. It was hard to see on x-rays in those days, but if you do an MRI scan of anybody that age or older, you're going to see some signs of wear and tear, and often the meniscus inside the knee starts to dry out as we get older. It gets cracks in it. And so we were seeing that and thinking, wow, that must be the cause of the pain. So we'll go in there and clean it up. And so we used to sort of scrape out the knee, take out any loose or torn pieces. And then later on, we'd see the patients and a lot of them would say they got better. So we would attribute that improvement to the procedure. And now that's not scientific, because we don't know what would have happened to that patient if we had not operated on them. And it turns out that people with degenerative knee conditions, they sometimes have pain, sometimes they don't. It goes up and down, and sometimes they'll have a bad week and a good month and a bad year. If you take that patient with a fluctuating condition and you do something to them when their pain is at its peak, you can do anything to them and their pain won't stay at the peak forever. I mean, it's going to go back to the average. And so the thing was, you had to try and operate on them before they got better on their own. So we'd operate on them pretty quick, and then we'd see them, and sometimes we'd see them a couple of weeks later and they'd say, no, my pain is still really bad. And we'd say, that's okay. Sometimes it takes surgery a while to work. And then they'd come back, another month later, and their pain would finally be better because it was going to be anyway. So that's why we were doing so. That's why it was the #1 procedure in orthopedics, was knee arthroscopy. It wasn't until people started doing studies where they said, let's see what happens if we don't do knee arthroscopy in some people and we do it in others. And patients were randomized as to which one they got. So it was the toss of a coin. So this is a good scientific way of finding out how it works. And when we did those studies, there's now been about 15 of those studies done in the last 20 years or so. And virtually all of those studies have shown that surgery is not better than whatever the alternative was. The alternative could be physical therapy. And in a couple of cases, the alternative was placebo surgery, where small incisions were made, but no procedure was done on the inside of the knee. And the beauty of those studies is that the patients didn't know whether they actually got the real procedure or the pretend procedure. And those studies showed no difference. And it's amazing when you look at documentaries that have been made about these studies. They show, there's one with an elderly man running around playing soccer with his grandchildren and saying how happy he is with the procedure. And he had the sham procedure. He didn't actually have the real procedure. And I need to make it clear, it's not that the procedure had a strong placebo effect. It is that they would have improved anyway with an alternative treatment or even with no treatment. Now, the other interesting thing is what's happened to that procedure since then. So these studies have been out now for more than 10 years. We published in Australia, we've shown that the rates of knee arthroscopy in between 2011 and 2017 roughly halved. It's a 48% reduction. Huge reduction. In Denmark, it's fallen. In areas of Norway, it's fallen. It hasn't fallen in a lot of other countries. And in a lot of places in the US, they're still doing it just as much. And even pockets here, if I go around to my local private hospital, surgeons are doing operating lists of 10, 11, 12 knee arthroscopies on patients 60, 70, 80 years of age, which is basically just a waste of their money and my money, because I'm paying health insurance premiums and I'm paying government levies and things like that. So that's the story of knee arthroscopy. It got introduced before it got assessed. Things should be assessed before they get introduced. And it's the other way around with surgery.
Thank you. What role do universities play in the medical industry? In other words, a lot of us think of universities as just places where we go to college and go to grad school. A lot of people aren't even aware of their role. So what is the role of universities in the medical industry?
So the role changed radically starting in 1980. We passed a bill called the Bayh-Dole Act. It was a time when Japan was starting to kind of pick America's pocket with cheaper cars and the early computer technology. So we passed the Bayh-Dole Act because much of the money that was paying for federal research was developing products that were never commercialized. And the feds felt they were wasting their money. So in order to make sure that the research that they funded actually got into the market to be able to benefit society, they passed the Bayh-Dole Act, which said that when universities and other nonprofit research institutions get federal money to do studies, they can patent the results of the findings of their research, federally funded research, and they can keep the money. This is critical. The book that Harvard President Derek Bok wrote is called Universities in the Marketplace. So universities, which when we all went to college were places seen as the overseers of the integrity of the knowledge that society operates on, suddenly became profit-making centers. And their questions, and this is a big part of how American medicine has gotten off track. The question is, how can we make products? It's called innovation, but innovation doesn't mean that you're making a product that's going to make society a better place. It means that you're going to make a product that makes money. And so universities, rather than being overseers of the integrity of knowledge, became producers of commercial knowledge. And this is a major, major cornerstone foundation of how we've gotten off in this wrong direction.
Indeed, we now have the medical industrial complex, to paraphrase Dwight Eisenhower. The fact is that, we have partnered with, pharma in this glad-handing version of profit making. So I completely agree, and you can see it in so many different ways.
I had always, I'm not involved in the medical industry, and then at some point I had heard that this something called the Cochrane Review, which was the solution that they were going to be these high integrity organization that was going to carefully review studies so that the lay public could get accurate information. What is the status of the Cochrane reviews? Are they a solution to make sure we get accurate information?
Well, it's like I said before, the Cochrane group does meta-analyses, taking data that's already in the literature and conglomerating it. The problem is the results are only as good as the data that goes into it. So if the data is tainted, then the results are tainted, garbage in, garbage out. In fact, Peter Goetze, who was one of the heads, was the European head of the Cochrane Review, ultimately quit it, in part because it was not they were not maintaining their scientific integrity, and they were basically publishing garbage themselves.
He was actually he was ousted in a kind of a palace coup, and he, as far as I can tell, he was trying to maintain their independence, and these people now have pharmaceutical ties. So I mean, I think it's probably still one of the better sources of information, but it's like everything else, the money creeps in.
It is a good source of information, and they also grade the evidence, and it's not a matter of uncritically including all trials. They will grade the evidence and look at what they call the risk of bias. In other words, for each study that they include in one of their summaries, they'll say, well, these ones are at high risk of bias. So you need to be careful. These ones, or this one is at low risk of bias, and so it may be more reliable. And that's a fairly good way of not just sort of uncritically piling all the studies together, which a lot of, as Dr. Litton says, a lot of reviews do that, and it's a shame that they do.
We got a really good education about the importance of the Cochrane reviews from the reviewers of the drug Tamiflu, the drug to treat influenza. They wrote a review based on the evidence that was available and said that Tamiflu is an effective drug and it decreases hospitalizations and may decrease death. And they got a letter from a Japanese doctor about 3 years after they published the initial review, and said that the articles that you have relied on include data that from drug company studies that were never published. So not only did peer reviewers not get the evidence, but nobody got the evidence. And the Cochrane reviewers doggedly, and in thousands of hours of their volunteer time, chased down the data from Roche, the manufacturer, I think it's Roche, of Tamiflu. And it went back and forth for maybe 4 years, and they finally got the data from the manufacturer. And the data showed that there was no evidence that Tamiflu decreased hospitalizations or deaths. And in fact, the total benefit of Tamiflu, this is a drug that all the major wealthy countries had been stockpiling to fight flu. The total benefit of Tamiflu was to decrease the symptomatic period from 7 days to 6 1/3 days. And they rewrote that. They had total integrity. They rewrote the Cochrane review, and that is the review that stands, even though unfortunately many doctors believe, and I even hear the people at the CDC sometimes say we're looking for a drug like Tamiflu, and I just have to laugh because I hope they don't mean it.
Tamiflu went viral as Scamaflu. That was what everybody called it after that episode.
Yeah. The guys who did that. Yeah.
You just mentioned, we spoke about the FDA. What about the CDC? What is their role? What's their relation in the medical industry? What kind of accuracy do they have? Tell us about how they fit into the medical industry.
I have two words: Coca-Cola. And I'm serious. Coca-Cola has bought off the CDC, and I can prove it. If you want me, I'll find the slides that show Brenda Fitzgerald, who was the head of the CDC back in 2015 to 2017. He was on the Coca-Cola board and actually published several blogs about childhood obesity, saying that it's a problem of exercise, taking money from Coca-Cola all the way. In fact, there are several industry there's several articles about the relationship between the CDC and the food industry in terms of non-communicable disease. I wouldn't trust anything that came out of that part of the CDC. On the infectious side, I'm sure I don't have as much information. I'll defer to my colleagues here on the panel. But on the non-communicable disease side, I wouldn't trust anything they said.
Okay. What is the medical review board, and how does it influence what doctors teach or doctors say?
Do you mean the state boards of medicine?
I don't know. I have it written from one of the books. There was the medical review board and how doctors were afraid of the medical review board because they didn't do what they were told as part of the medical industry protocols, that they could get their license taken away by the medical review board. So that put pressure on them to follow along with whatever the industry was saying they needed to do.
Stephen, the doctors are regulated by each state, and we're licensed in each state, and there's some reciprocity, but the thing that governs doctors' behavior and so on is our state laws. And I think they were talking, as Dr. Abramson said, about the medical boards in the states. And the medical boards, when they get a complaint, they're required to investigate it. And they they have like a trial system with their own judges and their own investigators and so on. And it's something that can be a very unpleasant misadventure for any physician to get involved with. So that's what I think they were referring to.
I guess the question really is, do doctors have freedom to say, prescribe and treat patients as they like, or are there certain protocols they're expected to follow or not follow?
Well, the medical boards are not, I'm not going to answer this one. I'm not sure I'm as qualified as these other guys.
I mean, doctors are fairly free to prescribe what they think is best. One of the problems with policing medical practice is the medical negligence side of it. And the problem there, and I'd be interested to hear how the law works in the US, but I can tell you in Australia, which is probably representative of a lot of other countries, is that the standard that you are held to is the standard of your peers. And I do a lot of medical negligence expert witness stuff. And I have a problem where, for example, a surgeon can do a procedure that was unnecessary and led to harm. But when it gets to court, they say, is this a recognized treatment that peer surgeons perform and do? Is this a recognized treatment for this procedure? And I have to say yes. I have to say it's completely unnecessary. It's wrong, and it shouldn't be done. But yes, everybody's doing it. And so legally, that doctor is in the clear. So you're basically covered if you're doing what everyone else is doing. And it's only when you stand out, like a friend of mine who did not operate on somebody, because I actually led a study that showed that this procedure on wrist fractures was no better than not operating. He didn't operate, and he got sued for not operating because he found some other, or the patient found some other surgeons that said he should have operated on him. And then it becomes he said, she said, and the court has to decide. But if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you're pretty safe in medicine, unfortunately, because what everyone else is doing isn't always right.
I was going to say you're legally safe, but this is an important issue with our guidelines, which are financially conflicted and don't have access to the data, because those guidelines can be entered into these cases as evidence to show that the doctor should or should not have prescribed it based on what the guidelines say, but nobody's taken the guidelines to court.
For sure, yeah.
What information do you have about the cancer industry? In other words, it's a very significant industry, and you had said that that 97% of the most frequently cited studies are funded by industry. That was, I guess, for clinical trials overall. But in terms of cancer and cancer drugs and cancer protocols, would you have any information on how effective and accurate they are?
So I worked at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, pediatric cancer hospital, so I'm relatively facile with that. The bottom line is that the FDA will approve a drug, a new cancer therapeutic, if it increases lifespan by a total of 4 months. If you can show a 4-month increase over historical controls, that will get you approval. And of course, cancer therapies being highly toxic to begin with, side effects are not usually a big issue unless, of course, you die during the induction phase of cancer treatment, which of course you have to report. Bottom line is 4 months worth $300,000. That becomes a value judgment. And the FDA has decided they're not interested in value judgments. That's not their job. So 4 months apparently is enough of a criterion to approve a new cancer therapeutic.
Dr. Lustig, it's worse than that. Okay, the FDA will approve drugs based on what are called surrogate endpoints, which means tumor size reduction and no mortality improvement at all. So the oncologist academic literature is replete with big pronouncements that their big goal is to improve lifespan by 2 months, and they only have about 5 or 6 entities that they can treat adequately. So I think things are a lot worse than you think they are. And part of the problem is that these guys have the biggest, quote, conflict of interest or bribery going in medicine. They get 20% of all the drugs that they administer in their office. And these drugs are hundreds of thousands of dollars a year frequently. So these guys' ambition is to get a room filled with Barca loungers and all their patients reclining in these things, getting the chemo drugs. It's just like a big farm. And it's quite ineffective with some few exceptions. So, I mean, it's a difficult specialty. I can't imagine dealing with all that death and dying. And you got to give them credit. They went into it, but their incomes have done very well with the fee splitting that they do with pharma. And if you and I, Dr. Lustig, were partners, and I said, look, I've invented this drug, I'll give you 20%. If you market the drug for me, you can have 20% for selling it. That would be called capping, which is a federal crime. We could both go to jail if they caught us. So it's a much bleaker picture for oncology than what you portray. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. I mean,
you're true. The studies have shown that a lot of cancer drugs were proved based on surrogate outcomes.
Surrogate outcomes,
like pathology findings,
tumor
rather
markers,
than the actual effect on life expectancy. And in some of those drugs that were approved, it was shown later that after they'd been approved, when the cat is out of the bag, that they did not have a beneficial effect on patient survival.
It's the second most corrupt specialty.
What's the most?
Psychiatry. Psychiatry, they have virtually no placebo-controlled trials on any of those drugs, because the problem is they got everybody on the damn drugs. They've got 17% of the U.S. populace on psych drugs now, and so there it's all based on soap bubbles. The drugs are exceedingly toxic. They are tremendously addictive. I mean, have you ever heard anybody getting off an SSRI after they've been on it 5 years? I mean, it's practically impossible. It changes your brain chemistry. You know, they talk about reducing the doses over years, and it still doesn't work. The people have recurrent anxiety and depression, and they're treating entities that used to be regarded as cyclic, right? And now they're chronic because they get them on these drugs, and they're on the drugs forever. And our disability rates have gone up in tandem with the drug use. I mean, and the most keen observers think it's all causal. So that's the most corrupt specialty. In my view, it's the most expensive specialty we have. Everybody's got a mental health problem.
Do colonoscopies save lives? Do mammograms save lives? Do statins save lives? Those three questions: colonoscopies, mammograms, and statins.
Okay, you want to say screening colonoscopies and screening mammograms. That means examining people who have no symptomatology. You want to qualify what you're saying, and the answer is absolutely not. As statins, the same thing. It's people who are treated for purely for blood levels, and not for post MI. Perhaps it does save lives, and maybe in the very rare hereditary hypercholesterolemia, there is some indication, some small statistical improvement. But all the things you mentioned, in my view, from my reading, are completely ineffective.
So I don't know enough about colonoscopy or what was the other one? Mammograms. That's not my field, but I do know about statins. And I agree with you, Dr. Yoho. In fact, the paper just came out a week ago, very large, hundreds of thousands of patients looking at both primary prevention of MI with statins and secondary prevention of MI with statins. And bottom line is a 1.3% improvement in lifespan, which is basically zero with primary prevention. With secondary prevention, these are patients who've already declared themselves at risk. And there is a benefit for secondary prevention once you've already had an MI, using a statin to try to reduce the incidence of a second MI. But for primary prevention, actually, turns out no benefit, appreciable benefit. The mean increase in lifespan is 4 days, 44 different studies, 44 different studies. Dubroff et al. You can look at Evidence-Based Medicine 2017. And 20% of patients who are treated with statins for primary prevention get hyperglycemia, glucose intolerance, and/or diabetes, because they are mitochondrial toxins.
With mammography, there was and I think it was Peter Gertcher that you've all referred to, that did.
He wrote a book about it.
Yeah, and I think he did the Cochrane review of mammography, and it's just a good example of something that's just assumed to help. Like, how could it not help? It's when you get told you can have a screening test, and whether it's mammography or thyroid screening or whatever it is, and it will detect if you've got a cancer or not, and it could pick it up before it gets harmful, and we could get it out early. It just sounds really good. But when you put it to the test, so in mammography, they've done it with hundreds of thousands of people where they've randomized them to either having routine mammography or not. They've found that the benefit to it is, in some studies, zero, in some studies, marginal, to whether or not you live or die. In other words, your life expectancy. And a classic example of how screening can actually be harmful came from South Korea, where a while back they introduced screening because they thought, well, we want to pick up all these diseases. We want to help people. We want to improve the health of society. And one of the things they started screening for was thyroid cancer. And this became big business because the doctors who owned the ultrasound clinic where they did the tests, they were getting paid, and they were picking up a lot of thyroid cancer. Now, it just so happens that a lot of us, a lot of people on this call probably have thyroid cancer. There's a type of thyroid cancer called papillary, which is just very common, and it usually doesn't kill you. But they were picking it up. And so they were referring people to surgery. People were having their thyroid taken out. Now there's big problems with that. If you don't have a thyroid, you don't have thyroid hormones. So you're on lifetime replacement. There's some very important glands that lie behind the thyroid called the parathyroids. You lose them, you're in huge trouble, and you're on lifetime replacement of another drug. A certain percent, or 1 or 2% of cases, when they take out the thyroid, they take out a nerve that goes to your vocal cords, and so you can't speak anymore. And so, and every now and then someone will die from this surgery. So quickly in South Korea, thyroid went from being a not very common cancer to being the most diagnosed cancer in the country. Incredible harms were done. People were on lifetime replacement therapy. They're having surgery. They're losing their voices, and many people died as a result of this. And then after many years of all this screening, of diagnosing so many cases early, they looked at the trend in deaths from thyroid cancer, and it was a straight line. It didn't move. They didn't save any lives at all, because the severe forms of thyroid cancer were going to kill you anyway. And they were just picking up these benign forms and operating on people and causing harm. So they've had to walk this back and try and reverse this, but it became such an industry. People were making money from the hospitals, from the surgeons, the GPs, the scanners, the drug replacements. It was just this huge industry that was very difficult to walk back. And one of the reasons it was difficult to walk back is because it sounds so good. It just makes sense to people. So it's very difficult to describe to people. Having a mammography may not actually help you.
It leads to a cascade of medical services that often include complications and other problems. John Ioannidis said that basically he didn't think that any screening test was improved mortality. And melanoma is a classic example, identical to your thyroid cancer story. The dermatologists were sort of losing traction about 30 or 40 years ago, and they engaged a Madison Avenue marketing firm to say what to do. And they all said that they should become fierce cancer fighters instead of pimple poppers. So they started publicizing melanoma and how they had to save the world from melanoma, do total skin exams and this and that. And exactly the same thing occurred. The total amount of diagnoses went crazy, but the mortality curve was absolutely flat or nearly flat. So melanoma is not increasing. It's a misconception based on the marketing schemes of the dermatologists.
I want to go back for a sec and pick up on what Dr. Lustig was saying about statins. When you look at whether the question is often asked, should I take a statin? Should I not take a statin? And that's the wrong question. The question is, what's the likelihood that a statin will prevent you from dying or prevent you from having a cardiovascular event? And if you put all the studies together, for people who so-called secondary prevention, for people who already have cardiovascular disease, you have to treat 30 people for 5 years to prevent one a heart attack or stroke, and the other 29 people won't benefit. And you have to treat 80 of those people for 5 years to prevent a death. So the number needed to treat is 80, the number needed to treat is 80 to prevent a death, 79 won't have a death benefit, 30 to prevent a cardiovascular event. That's not a yes-no fact. People should talk to their doctors about that. And as a former family doc, having some idea of those numbers, I felt that I should tell people the numbers, ask them what they wanted to do. If they wanted to take the drugs, say there may be side effects, so come back if there are side effects, but that it's not my decision. if people said, Doc, I'm not a number person, what should I do? I said, well, there is some benefit if you want to try it and see how you do. For primary prevention, there is not a significant death benefit. And according to the current guidelines in the United States, people who have between 7.5% risk and 20% risk of developing a cardiovascular event over the next 10 years should be on a statin. You have to treat 100 of those people for 5 years with a statin in order to prevent one non-fatal heart attack or stroke.
500 patient years.
Yes, 500 patient years.
It's ridiculous.
Well, people can draw their own conclusion. I'm not saying yes or no, but
What's
I
your
think it's
conclusion?
essential that we explain what the data shows about what the benefits are and aren't, and let people participate in that decision.
Well, let me weigh in on that too. The reason that statins are so complicated is because we're looking at one primary surrogate endpoint called LDL. And LDL is not one thing. It's two. There's one called large buoyant, and there's one called small dense. Turns out the large buoyant LDL is cardiovascularly neutral. It's large, it doesn't get under the surface of the endothelial cell to start the foam cell plaque formation process. And it's buoyant, it's carried via laminar flow through the capillaries and through the arterioles. So it doesn't have an opportunity to set up, and it also tends not to oxidize because it's oxidized LDL. That's the big problem because it's larger. Small dense is the bad guy in the story. They're small, they do get under the surface, they're dense, they don't float, and they oxidize much more easily. Turns out statins only treat the large buoyant. They're working at the level of the liver to reduce the large buoyant. It's the small dense that matters, but the large buoyant is 80% of what's in the bloodstream. So basically, it will reduce your LDL level, but that's the wrong surrogate measure. If you were looking at a surrogate measure, small dense would be a good one, and there you don't see any effect. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see any improvement in cardiovascular risk ratio or mortality in those patients. So if you look at people who've already declared themselves in secondary, then there again seems to be a benefit because they've already declared themselves.
Well, Dr. Abramson, can't you decide on the basis of 500 patient years of treatment of this? You know, it's not a very toxic drug, the statins, not compared to a lot of other things we know about, but 500 patient years to treat to prevent one non-fatal heart attack. I mean, how many patients have the skills to make a decision like that? And if you're not sure, how can they be sure?
Well, we can't make the decision for them. I mean, no therapy is 100% effective or zero, or not many are 0% effective. It's always shades of gray. And I think we've got to bring patients in and give them the best information we've got.
Well, it's a little like the urologist trying to counsel about radical prostatectomy. You know, I mean, 25% of them get impotent, 25% get incontinent, and 25% had the cancer metastatic already. And the urologist has enormous conflict of interest, right? He gets to make all the money, and he's disappointed if he can't do the surgery. So they got a hammer and a nail, and that's all they see. So I mean, look, the decision seems simple to me, and I was willing before I retired to help my patients understand the math, and 500 patient years for the potential problems that is. I mean, how many people could get through 500 patient years without having some horrible complication with a statin? I mean, the chances are it's a pretty clear balancing thing, to me. But maybe to you, you see things in a lot more detail because maybe you're brighter than I am. But I sort of see things in, does the patient go upstairs and get admitted, or do they go back out on the street? I'm originally an emergency physician. It's binary almost. And what is the bottom line with 500 patient years of taking a statin? I wouldn't want to take one for 20 years, let alone 500 patients.
Right. And I think the most important takeaway message for the doctor-patient discussion is that the evidence is pretty strong that the conversation ought to be about getting exercise and eating a healthy diet. I mean, we talk about statins as an end in itself, and it's not. The goal of taking statins is to decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease. And if we wanted to have a conversation about cardiovascular disease, then the first subject, and probably the second, third, and fourth, would be how to take matters into your own hands and live a healthy lifestyle. And then maybe in the fifth place, maybe people would want to have a conversation about whether or not to take statins.
I want to hear what Dr. Lustig has to say about saturated fats.
Saturated fat is not the cause of cardiovascular disease.
It's a good thing, right?
Insulin resistance is the cause of cardiovascular disease. So red meat, it's all about red meat, okay? So the studies say that red meat increases risk of cardiovascular disease. And that's true. The hazard risk ratio for high red meat consumption is 1.25. Now, public health experts say you have to have a hazard risk ratio of 1.3 or greater to be a public health issue. But 1.25, I mean, it's still there, it's still significant. However, it's not about the saturated fat. If you control for the heme, the branched chain amino acids, and the trimethylamine oxide, TMAO, that comes from metabolism of choline by the microbiome from red meat, because red meat's very high in choline, the hazard risk ratio goes from 1.25 down to 1.10. So saturated fat's still there. In fact, the PURE study showed that saturated fat was cardiovascularly neutral. It's probably the oxidative stress of the iron. It's probably the insulin resistance from the branched chain amino acids because of the corn-fed beef in America, at least, maybe not in Australia, Dr. Harris, and also the TMAO. So I'm not saying red meat is good. Red meat has a potential problem, but it's not because of the saturated fat. And we equate red meat saturated fat and dairy saturated fat as if they are the same thing. They are not. Red meat saturated fat are even chain fatty acids, C16 and 18, palmitate and stearate. Dairy saturated fat are odd chain fatty acids, C15 and C17, with a specific phospholipid signature that has actually been shown to be protective against cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And when we take the fat out of the diet, the saturated fat out of the diet, we're taking both out. So you're taking out something that's actually protective. So saturated fat is the tempest in the teapot that we got wrong 50 years ago. And, Ansel Keys, may he burn in hell.
So what do you think about the carnivore diets?
It works. I'm not a fan of it. I think there are some things missing, but it does work, and it does seem to improve, certainly improves small dense LDL, which is the bad guy. It increases total LDL because, dietary fat.
Right, but what about mortality and other diseases and all that?
There's a slight improvement in surrogate measures. I don't think anybody's been able to look at mortality. Hasn't gone on long enough.
Yeah.
It's one question about hospitals. We're told that hospitals are nonprofit. That sounds pretty friendly. So I feel like the hospital is certainly, on my side, it's a not-for-profit hospital. They're just trying to help me. Can you tell me what their role is in the medical industry?
So first of all, non-profit hospitals in America, I won't say anything about the rest of the world. Nonprofit hospitals in America are anything but. Okay, all they have to do in order to declare nonprofit status is treat 1% of their patients for free. That's it. Okay, other than that, they are for-profit, and in fact, they make more money than the for-profit hospitals, and their executives actually have a higher salary than the for-profit hospitals.
There's very little oversight.
There's
because they don't have a board.
Oversight.
They don't have a board like for-profits.
I took health law in law school to learn about this, and there is no such thing as a nonprofit hospital.
Hospitals are the second most corrupt part of medical care.
Yeah, our private hospitals in Australia are divided between for-profit companies and non-profit groups. But in speaking to one of the largest non-profit groups about doing research and things, and they wanted to know, I wanted to do a study there, and they wanted to know how much money I was going to give them. And I said, well, this is just research, it's investigator initiated. It's not an industry study. And they said, oh, because there's one thing you need to understand about our organization. We're not for profit, but we're also very much not for loss. And yeah, they make money, but they channel it into other things.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to open the panel up for questions from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, you can go to the bottom to the reactions tab, and you can click the raise hand, and then I could call on you to ask a question. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. In the meantime, let me ask you another question. What do you know or have to say about cardiac bypass artery graft, CABG surgery? What does the evidence say about this? What is the information? What do you have to tell us about this?
Coronary artery bypass grafting is a fairly major surgical procedure to try and improve the blood supply to the heart. And so it's for arterial disease in the heart. It was a boom industry in the 80s and 90s, and has suffered greatly because of the interventionalists, and now most patients have stents. And so stents are done for the same thing. They're done to unblock narrowings in the arteries that feed the heart. That actually, it's hard to understand. People don't see how the heart needs blood because it's full of blood, but it actually needs its own blood supply, and that's the problem. And that's what causes a heart attack if that gets blocked. Unfortunately, though, the larger high quality studies where people have had this procedure compared to just taking drugs or other medical treatments, or not having it done at all, have shown that for what we call stable angina, which is not somebody having a heart attack right now, but somebody with heart disease, that having this procedure is not better than not having it, all the alternatives. And having a stent for a stable angina or just heart disease that's visible on a scan is the most common reason for having it done. So it's one of the most common surgical procedures performed. It's very common, with hundreds of thousands have been done. And yeah, there is some evidence for it in acute situations, but for most of the time, it's not better than not having it. And again, it's hard to get that message across because it makes sense, but you're narrowing a tight artery, that must be better. Yeah, but there's other things that happen when you do that. There's unintended consequences. The heart develops other blood supplies to make up for that narrowing. There's all these sort of complicated issues that go into it. But there's been some high quality studies showing that it's not better than medical alternative, non-surgical alternatives.
Let me see if I can clarify what Dr. Harris said. And he traipsed onto stents and angioplasties in a question that was regarding coronary artery bypass grafting. And I think it might have been a little bit confusing for the audience, but he gave a good answer. But I'll see if I can describe the literature. And I'd love to hear criticisms of what I'm saying and see if what I've read is correct. For coronary artery bypass grafting, the only successful prolongation of life, the only improvement in mortality is in the left main disease, right? It's a 2-centimeter piece of artery that connects up 2 other major arteries that surround the heart. Now, if you plumb your way around that, and that's what coronary artery bypass grafting is, it's a simple conceptually, and it makes sense in a certain kind of a way, but the only studies that have shown improvement in lifespan have been in plumbing around the left main artery, not in any of the other arteries, right? So these guys, these surgeons, conceptually, it seems to make sense. They plumb their way around. The people have coronary blockages in multiple places. They do 5, 6, plumb arounds, and they see improvement in the way the heart looks in the chest. But the only improvement in mortality, in lifespan, is this plumbing around the left main. The left main equivalent, which is plumbing all 3 of the arteries simultaneously, does not produce an improvement in mortality, right? And the improvement in mortality is only 20% at 5 years. I mean, it's let's see if I remember exactly, but let me see if I remember. It's a small improvement in mortality for this one specific instance. And the entire edifice of coronary artery bypass grafting, the surgery, stands upon this one bit of evidence that only applies to left main disease, right? Now, traipsing onto the other subject, which is the competing industry, which is angioplasty, these guys have proven with their studies, the cardiologists, that the only time that they make an improvement in mortality, which is all you really care about, is if you have an acute event. You're really sick, you've got chest pain, and you're in trouble. You have what's called an ST elevation myocardial infarction, which is an obvious sign in the EKG, and it's actually relatively rare in terms of heart attacks. Dr. Harris said it properly, and he made the point correctly, that 95% plus of the angioplasty is done in disease which is chronic. They may not even have chest pain, but they go into the doctor's office, they get a stress test, and then they get angiogrammed, and they find these lesions, and they're not symptomatic. And 95% plus of angioplasties and stents are done on people without chest pain at all, right? And so they supposedly they can get a big improvement in the people with chest pain. But frankly, I looked at the numbers and I analyzed it in my book, and I think the entire effort is unfounded. And my reference is Norton Hadler's work. And he runs over the numbers, and I looked at them all, and I think that basically angioplasties are next to useless, and stents are absolutely without foundation. They got these drug eluting or drug secreting stents, and it just doesn't improve mortality, which is all you care about. And the only instance where it supposedly works are a small percent of the heart attacks where they have ST segment elevation. They're very sick, and these people they take them to the cath lab and they die in the cath lab in some percentage way that mimics the I mean the whole thing is a crazy effort. And I think these industries should be discredited. We spend about the same on coronary artery bypass grafting as angioplasty and stenting now. And, they pass them back and forth. One doesn't work, the other, they pass them the surgeon or the cardiologist. I'm curious about what Dr. Abrams has to say about what I just said, because I know he knows these numbers.
Yeah. Excuse me. I agree. I think there's a wonderful natural experiment that has happened. Ontario, Canada, controls the number of facilities that can do cardiopulmonary bypass surgery, coronary bypass surgery. And so in Ontario, there's 1/5 the number of facilities that do the procedure as there are in Pennsylvania, which has the same population. So in Ontario, the doctors have to decide which 1/5 of the patients are going to get the bypass surgery, and Pennsylvania has an open door. What they found is that there's absolutely no mortality difference between Pennsylvania and Ontario after an MI. What it shows is at the very least, that the doctors in Canada can figure out which fifth of the 20%, which 20% of the patients who are having an MI deserve coronary bypass surgery compared to the people in Pennsylvania. And it goes back to this idea that we have a market-based medical system. You can make money if your hospital does bypass surgery. There's no question about that. But we're not making people better in proportion to the amount of money that's being spent on it. Plus, it's very important to remember that it's major surgery, and a significant portion of folks in proportion to their age have mental status changes after their bypass surgery. So it's not without medical costs either.
3 to 9% of them die, and 30% of them have brain fog that lasts months. It's measurable neurological deficits.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, Nancy, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
I'm from Austin, Texas, and yes, I'm 71 years old and been on a plant-based diet for about 2 years. I am a very active person, gardening, Pilates and things like that. I have a shoulder pain, and it became considerably worse in the last couple of weeks. I went to see the orthopedist who did x-rays, said I have a bone spur, and at least part of it looks like it's bone on bone. And of course, she wants to give me a shoulder replacement surgery, which I said I'm not ready for. I did accept the cortisone shot, in which since that time, which was 8 days ago, I've had constant pain, which I talked to her over the phone today, and she says, well, sometimes it takes up to 2 weeks to kick in. My question to you is, what are your thoughts on shoulder replacement surgery? And hopefully that's not the route I want to go. But what can I do to get out of pain?
I'll take this one if it's okay. I'm only going to give general advice. I'm not going to give specific advice to individuals because I haven't seen your x-rays or anything like that. Joint replacement surgery is thought to be effective, but it's interesting that it's a bit like one of the other speakers was saying earlier, that we don't have a lot of good evidence comparing in randomized trials, comparing joint replacement surgery to not doing it. So for example, in shoulder replacement surgery, we don't have that evidence. In knee replacement surgery, there's been one study published in the New England Journal showing it to be effective for a certain type, but not as effective as we thought it would be. And for hip replacement, the results are very good. And so it's one of these things where it's been difficult to do a study because the difference between people's health status before and after the operation is very large. Whereas they can't walk without a stick before, and then they can walk very well afterwards. So it's thought to be, in fact, it was called the operation of the century. At the turn of the century, it was thought to be quite an effective operation. So shoulder replacements along those lines. So if your shoulder has worn out, okay, this is where it's completely worn out, where there's no lining on it anymore, and bone is rubbing against bone, that can be very painful, and replacing the joint can relieve that pain. It doesn't make it normal. You will not get normal movement back in your shoulder ever after a joint replacement, but it in most cases will be less painful. So it's a procedure that probably has a role, but just be warned, some people think, oh, well, if I have to have it, I have to have it. Nobody has to have elective surgery. It is a choice where you weigh up the risks and benefits.
Mark, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes, I'm from Providence, Rhode Island, and I practice integrative medicine. And I actually am familiar with the writings of Dr. Yoho and Dr. Abramson. I really like what you write and appreciate all of what you've said today. And I also know Dr. Lustig and Dr. Harris. I have a lot of admiration for you guys. So I've been in practice for about 32 years. And as time has gone on, I've gradually pulled away from doing more conventional medicine to doing integrative medicine. And part of this is my perception that the profession of medicine has become increasingly corrupted. And it's been corrupted by the kind of financial interests that you guys made reference to, by ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And more recently, it's become more or less overmastered by the public health department and incapable of asserting itself independently. And I'm seeing modern medicine as being in a state of decay that from internal corruption. And I'm wondering, does anybody see a way out? Do you see any hope for the future of medicine? Or are we going to continue to decay internally due to these corruptive influences?
Mark, let me take a shot at that. You should be on the panel.
Yeah, really.
What we understand. I think the only way out of this is for a coalition of healthcare providers who understand that they aren't getting good information, purchasers, non-healthcare related purchasers of health insurance, who are getting ripped off, and they're paying about $4,500 a year extra for each covered life of their employees, and they can have families. And that makes these businesses far less competitive domestically and internationally. And most important for the American public, that is not getting the health care that they would get if they lived in another wealthy country, and they're paying through the teeth for it. And if our democracy is going to work, a coalition of the providers, the purchasers, and the consumers has to become more powerful than the pharmaceutical industry's money and lobbyists and PR work. That's the only way out of this mess. It may be a long shot, but that's the only way out.
Yeah. Let me weigh in also. I agree with what you said, Dr. Abramson. I actually see one 2,000-pound gorilla in the room that could actually do something. And you mentioned it, it's the insurers. The problem with medicine, and it's been true since 1935, the problem with medicine is fee for service. The problem with medicine is we pay doctors to do stuff. We pay them for procedures. Now we pay them for RVUs. We don't pay them to get better. We pay them to get worse, is what we do. And the problem is that the insurers were happy to do it because they would just raise the rates. They always stayed ahead because that was their job. So they were happy when you got sick. It was actually in their best interest for you to get sick. And so it was the casino model. It's the same thing that happens in Las Vegas. They're happy when you come in. They're even happy when you win. Why? Because they know next time you're going to lose. And that's it was pay to play and set the rates. Okay. They took, money right off the top. Now, Obamacare, and you can say whatever you want to about the Affordable Care Act, since today is the actual 12th anniversary of the signing of the Affordable Care Act. Biden and Obama were actually at the White House touting its success. And you can say whatever you want about the success or failure of Obamacare, and I don't even care what you say about it. How about that? It did one thing. One thing. What it did was it capped profits by the insurance company at 15%. Anything else they had to return back to the consumer. All of a sudden, the insurers now can't make as much money off each individual illness as they did before. Now, for the first time in their existence, they actually want you to be healthy, not sick. And the problem is they don't know how. The point is, you can't fix healthcare till you fix health. They don't know what that is. They don't have a blessed clue what health is. They know how to pay for sickness. And it's been said a zillion times, we have a sick care model, not a healthcare model. That's exactly right. Could the insurers make money doing the right thing? Absolutely. But it means changing the entire medical business model. That means changing physicians' reimbursement. That's a big deal. That's a big nut to crack. Could it be done? Yes, it could be done. I actually talk about it in my last chapter of Metabolical. What would actually have to happen in order to make those changes and get insurers and providers on the same page in terms of being reimbursed for doing the right thing instead of the wrong thing. And that means also the food industry has to be reimbursed for doing the right thing instead of the wrong thing. Can be done, but right now, nobody's interested in doing it. So I feel your pain, Mark, and I'm with you, but there is hope, but it's a very, very, thin window of light here.
The problem is we've got an economic model for something that doesn't follow economic principles.
That's right.
And so we've got a health care industry, not a health industry. And it doesn't even obey the laws of supply and demand. If you put twice as many doctors in a region, you just get twice as much healthcare delivered. You don't get twice as healthy. So it's very difficult to build this sort of typical, fee for service, let's just pay people to do more model when it doesn't work like that. It doesn't obey those principles.
So the Affordable Care Act mandated that insurance expenses be less than 20%. And the insurance industry lobbied ferociously for a lot more. And it doesn't apply to companies which self-fund their healthcare coverage, where the percentage is probably much higher. For example, Texas Blue Cross and Blue Shield, they've had expenses as high as 36% of the total. And so I think insurance is the most corrupt part of the medical system. And I certainly wouldn't lean on them to make any kind of reforms. Elizabeth Rosenthal in An American Sickness, that's the name of her book, she said that the insurance administration costs average around 20%. And they, as has been observed previously, they take it right off the top. And it's arguably an incentive to waste, because the bigger the pie is, the bigger percent they get.
Sheila, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes, I would. I'm from Humble, Texas, and I would like to ask the panel of their opinion of weight loss surgery for the improvement of health.
Well, since I'm in the obesity business, I guess I ought to take that. And the short answer is it works. It does work. But 1/3 of the patients who undergo obesity surgery and get an estimated 30% excess weight loss actually gain it back. And the question is why? Why does 1/3 of the patients end up not benefiting? And the answer is because they're not screening properly for what the problem is. There are lots of reasons for obesity. One of the reasons for obesity is food addiction, and very specifically sugar addiction, because sugars really and caffeine are really the only two items in food that you can be addicted to. They're the only things that actually stimulate the reward center in the brain and generate a dopamine response, which is basically, the hallmark of the addictive response. That addiction is not going away because of weight loss surgery. And so a lot of people end up having weight loss surgery and becoming alcoholics in order to stimulate that nucleus accumbens instead, or start smoking, or they go back to sugar and they drink their calories instead of eating them. And so, if the patients are screened properly and provided with appropriate post-op care, which a lot of weight loss surgeons don't even do. So you have to do it in an organized professional program that has post-op follow-up. If it's just a cut and run bariatric surgeon, stay away. Do not do it. But if it's an organized program at an academic medical center with appropriate social support, and they've screened you properly for for addiction and for psychiatric and psychological and abuse, adverse childhood experiences and abuse issues, it does work.
But does it work as well as losing weight through other means?
Depends on the patient.
Okay.
Depends on the patient. There are patients who, because of either genetic influences, because of FTO, because of the gene that increases both food intake and reduces expenditure. There are patients who do better with bariatric surgery. It's not a perfect science, but we have a lot of screening tools that are available to try to pick the right patients for bariatric surgery. We used to do this at UCSF. I used to refer patients, for bariatric surgery at UCSF, and we actually had good experiences with it.
Leota, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I learned to work this thing. Anyway, I am 81 years old, and next Wednesday I'm scheduled for a colonoscopy. Basically, I'm really good health for my age. I'm active and basically plant-based diet, basically. And I was wondering if they are safe. Should I go ahead with this? I've had a in my lower right abdomen. It can come on suddenly at night, and it's very sharp, probably on the 8 pain level. Do you think this would be good for me to do this?
I think you need to take the advice of your doctor. This is not a screening colonoscopy. It sounds like you have a complaint and that the colonoscopy is being done to investigate and possibly treat that complaint. No surgical procedure is 100% safe, and even keyhole procedures or colonoscopies have so many percent things that can go wrong, but they can also provide you with benefit. It's a way of seeing into you to find out what's causing your pain. So nobody would guarantee any surgery, but colonoscopy is a recognized treatment to treat people with complaints, which is different to screening people who have no complaints, which is not your case.
Do you recommend screening colonoscopies?
No, I'm not up on the literature with that. Others may be, but the evidence for it isn't as good. I know I see it on in America. I think it's big business, isn't it? I mean, people get colonoscopies done regularly over there, but I'm not sure of the evidence that that's helpful in otherwise healthy people. Other panel members?
I think the evidence shows that colonoscopy is one way to screen for colon cancer, and the looking for occult blood is another way. And I don't think that there's a statistically significant benefit in colonoscopy to the non-invasive tests.
Yeah, but in this particular case, though, this is not a screening one, so I just need to point that out to Leota.
Yeah, and Dr. Harris, I agree. I think your answer is eloquent to Leota, but one thing, Leota, that you might want to consider would be to get a second opinion from another independent gastroenterologist and see if another doc listening to your story and listening to the pain that you're having comes to the same conclusion. If you're uncertain about it, that would be the way to handle it intelligently.
Yeah, I strongly recommend second and third opinions. The studies looking at second opinions have shown that the second opinion very frequently doesn't line up with the first, unfortunately.
I'd like to ask each of you gentlemen to make a 30-second closing statement just to sum up any final thoughts that you want to share with us before we close out for the evening.
I'll go first. Look, thanks for having me. I don't really have anything else to say, except I think the audience is already a little bit skeptical about a lot of medical procedures, but ask the question, what is the evidence that if I have this, I will be better than if I don't have it? It's a very simple question, but that's the question I would ask of the doctor.
And how do we follow up with you, Dr. Harris, if we want to get your book, if we want to stay in touch with you? What's the best way for someone to stay in touch?
You can find me on the internet, through my university appointments and things like that. The book is, thank you, very well advertised online there, and it's available, Amazon and everywhere else. So it should be pretty easy to get.
Okay, and if someone wants to find you, they can also go to our website, to your bio, and click on that. And when they click on it, it will take you to a page that gives your website address and other information.
Thanks.
And if they want your book, they can go to Amazon or they can go to our bookstore and click on your book. So thank you.
Thanks.
I guess I'll step up next. We've focused, this has been an excellent discussion, and we've focused more on the negative side of medical care than the positive side. And I think it's important to remember that there are good doctors and some medicines work. And the challenge for all of us, patients and doctors, and us doctors of patients as well, to be intelligent critics of the healthcare system, and to remember that medical science has provided some wonderful benefits, and we don't want to cut ourselves off. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
That was great.
It shouldn't be this hard. It is this hard, but we don't want to forego the benefits.
And
Yeah,
how would
sorry, go ahead.
And how would someone stay in touch with you, Dr. Abramson, if they want to get your book, if they want to follow up with you? What's the best way?
I would say exactly what Dr. Harris said. I'm not a good social media person, and I will give you my email, Steve, and people can write to me, and I'll respond.
Okay, and let's see, if they go on our website and click on you, it has your bio, it has your phone number there, doesn't have an email, but has some other information for you.
Well, let me send you the email so that you can update it. I'd much rather get an email than a phone call.
Should I read your email right now? I do have it. Should I read it?
Sure.
Actually,
Yeah.
Actually, if you go on our website and you click on your bio and go to your website, it says email, and if you click on it, it brings up your email. So we do have it already on our website.
Great.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was a great statement, Dr. Abramson, and you sort of took the words out of my mouth. And I want to remind the panelists that Dr. Abramson understood a lot of this stuff 20 years ago, before any of us understood any of it, I think. Certainly before I understood any of it. I think a lot of the problems today are our medical treatments are applied indiscriminately rather than using sort of the art of medicine. And it just makes the patient, they have to step up and they have to do their due diligence. And it's not an easy thing to understand. It's hard for us to understand, but you can learn about it from reading books like ours. And you can get a hold of me through robertyohoauthor.com, or I have a Substack blog, and you can subscribe to that at robertyoho.substack.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess that leaves me to clean up. So I'm just going to quote the first sentence of my book. There's a wasp in your attic. What do? Kill the wasp or destroy the wasp's nest? In order to solve a problem, you have to work upstream of the problem. Working downstream of the problem only fixes the result, not the cause. The cause is still there. And so if you kill the wasp, the next time you will be stung into submission. Ultimately, we in medicine have lost sight of this. We are working downstream of the problem. We are treating the symptoms of the problem. We are not treating the cause. We're not taught how. This is a systems biology issue. Medicine is the ultimate application of systems biology, and we don't even know what it means. In response, we have to reform the medical system. And unfortunately, that's a really tall order for all the reasons you've heard about tonight. I'm dedicated to fixing it, to bringing this to, shall we say, the attention of the public, who will ultimately apply pressure to get this problem fixed. But there are a lot of people right now making a lot of money off it. And so I'm glad that you all were able to attend tonight to listen to what the issues are. And hopefully you'll apply some pressure on the powers that be, your congressmen, your legislators, to try to, move the needle over the course of time. This is a generational shift that has occurred. It's going to take a generation to bring it back, but I'm confident eventually it will come back and realign. But it's going to take everyone working together.
I appreciate the 2.5 hours that you all spent tonight, as well as the 150 combined years of lifetime research you all did to get prepared for tonight to offer us this information. We've never had a medical panel like this, and I really appreciate it. And I want to recommend to everyone to look at the books that these gentlemen have written. Although this panel was great, if you want the details, definitely buy these books. They were outstanding from all of them. And I want to open up the mic so we can all thank you together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,